I can still hear the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. I can still smell the disinfectant mixed with something I can't name. Something damp and old, like soil after rain. It was 2:40 in the morning when I turned the corner toward the east wing and stopped, completely frozen. There, in the middle of the pitch-dark corridor, stood a little girl, small, motionless, her head tilted ever so slightly to one side, and she spoke in a voice far too calm for that hour, far too calm for that place. "Can you call my mom for me? I wasn't supposed to be in that hallway, and she had absolutely no business being there at all." Part 1. The hallway that should have stayed locked. I didn't choose the night shift. It was the only shift left when I took the emergency contract at St. Luke's Regional Hospital 3 weeks before that night. Newly transferred to the city. No permanent address, no friends, no support system. The kind of situation that makes you smile and sign whatever they put in front of you. My name is Carla. I'm 32 years old, 11 years in nursing, and until that night, I thought I'd seen everything this job could throw at me. I was wrong. St. Luke's Regional isn't a large hospital. 3 floors, 2 elevators that work intermittently, a small ICU on the 2nd floor, and a series of clinical wings spread across the 1st and 3rd. The building went up in the 70s, was partially renovated in the 90s, and since then had received nothing more than cosmetic touch-ups, the kind of fresh paint over old walls that doesn't fool anyone. The east wing on the 3rd floor was decommissioned. That's what everyone told me during orientation. The charge nurse, Mrs. Hargrove, a small woman with completely white hair and eyes that seemed to calculate everything at all times, was explicit on my first day that the East Wing is under renovation, restricted access. The entrance door stays locked, but your nursing badge opens every door in this hospital. Do not open that one. She said it with a strange emphasis, not like a safety warning, like a personal one. I nodded, memorized it, and got on with my routine. For 3 weeks, I followed the rule exactly. My shift ran from 7 at night to 7 in the morning. 3rd floor, West Wing. 14 beds, mostly clinical patients. A few simple post-ops, nothing I couldn't handle alone. With the help of the nursing tech who shared the first half of the shift with me. But that night, she left early. Family emergency. Kid with a high fever. She told me at 10, with her eyes already wet, and I said it was fine. I could manage. She should go, and it was fine. Until midnight, everything was absolutely normal. The hospital at night has a quality of silence that people on the outside don't understand. It isn't total silence. It never is. There's the constant hum of equipment, the rhythmic beep of cardiac monitors, the distant sound of the ventilation system. There's the occasional creak of the floor, the echo of footsteps on other levels, the muffled sound of a television in a room where sleep won't come. It's a full silence, a silence that breathes. I was used to it. Over the years, I'd learned to filter those sounds and immediately identify anything out of pattern. A different alarm tone, a voice pitched wrong, a noise that didn't belong in that environment. What I heard at 1:46 in the morning didn't belong in that environment. It was subtle, so subtle I almost dismissed it. A scraping sound, like something being dragged slowly across a tile floor, coming from above, from the third floor, my own floor, but from the wrong direction, from the direction of the east wing. I stopped in the middle of the medication I was preparing. I lifted my head. I listened. Silence. I took a deep breath. Thought about rats. The hospital had a history of infestations and went back to work. I finished the medication round, updated the charts, drank cold coffee from the hallway machine, and checked the remote. Monitors for every patient. Everything normal. At 1:58, the surveillance camera in the east corridor. Yes, there were cameras even in the decommissioned wing. Lost its signal. A blinking message on the nursing station panel. COM 3E. Signal lost. I should have called security. Should have logged the incident and waited. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight, tucked my badge in my pocket, and went to investigate. I say that with full awareness of how it sounds. I say it knowing any reasonable person will judge me, but I want you to understand. After 11 years of nursing, you develop a sense of professional responsibility that overrides rational fear. That hallway was my responsibility. Even decommissioned, even restricted, it was on my floor, under my indirect supervision. What if a delirious patient had wandered in there somehow? What if someone had fallen? I needed to check. The main hallway of the third floor splits into two arms at its center. Left, the west wing. My territory. Lit. Active. Familiar. Right. The east wing. The dead arm. Sealed by a steel door with a laminated sign. Renovation area. Restricted access. I held my badge to the reader. The light blinked green. The lock released with a dry click. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, not the smell of renovation. No paint. No fresh cement. No cut wood. Something else. Damp. Stale. Like a room that hadn't been ventilated in a very long time, but with something more. Something organic. Faintly sweet. That made me wrinkle my nose and start breathing through my mouth. I turned on the flashlight. The corridor opened before me like a faded version of the hallway I knew. Same layout, same structure, but everything coated in a layer of abandonment that didn't match recent renovation. The walls had paint peeling in large flakes, exposing previous layers, an old institutional green beneath the current white, and beneath the green, something that looked like a washed-out pink. The tile floor was intact, but covered in a thin, uniform layer of dust that recorded each step like a print in snow. I looked down at the floor. There were footprints in the dust, small ones, bare feet, leading toward the far end of the corridor. My heart did something strange. It didn't quite accelerate, but it changed rhythm, like an engine that hiccups before steadying. I moved slowly, keeping the flashlight steady. The room doors on both sides were closed, most of their small glass panels too dirty to see through. The corridor ended at a thick glass window. overlooking the parking lot below. A window I noticed was faintly fogged, as though there was a temperature difference between inside and out, but the air was still, cold, completely motionless. I was about 8 meters from the far window when my flashlight found her. She was standing in the middle of the corridor, completely still, completely motionless, as though she had always been there, and I was the one who had just appeared in her space, a little girl. My brain needed a few seconds to process what I was seeing, not because the image was ambiguous, but because it was so out of context that my mind resisted accepting it. A child in the decommissioned corridor at 2 in the morning. She appeared to be between 7 and 9 years old, small for her age, perhaps. Or maybe the narrow corridor made her seem smaller than she was. Dark hair, long, completely straight, falling on each side of her face like heavy curtains. She wore a hospital gown, the light blue cotton kind with the hospital logo printed on it, the type used for inpatients. That was far too big for her. The sleeves covering her hands and the hem nearly reaching her knees. Her feet were bare, in the dust. Her head was tilted slightly to the right. Not dramatically, but enough to be immediately noticeable. The kind of tilt a child makes when they're curious, or when they're listening to something nobody else can hear. And she was looking at me, not at my flashlight, at me, at my face, with a precision that made me realize she could see me perfectly in that darkness, even with the light pointed toward down her and leaving me practically blind to her expression. "Hi," I said. My voice sounded strange in the empty corridor, louder than I intended. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" She didn't answer immediately. She just watched me for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. 2 seconds, 3, 4, long enough for discomfort to start creeping up my spine like cold water. Then she said, "Can you call my mom for me?" The voice was a child's voice. Clear. No echo. No distortion. Perfectly normal, which was, for a reason I still can't fully articulate, the most unsettling detail of all. Everything around me was wrong. The place, the hour, the dust, the footprints, the smell, but the voice was perfectly, absolutely normal. "Of course," I said, and I'm proud of how calm I kept my tone. "Go." "Can you tell me your name?" "Are you a patient here?" She didn't answer the question. Instead, she said again, same intonation, same cadence, word for word identical. "Can you call my mom for me?" I took a slow breath. Disoriented child, possibly dissociative. I had protocols for this. I moved closer, carefully, crouching slightly to get closer to her level. "My name is Carla. I'm a nurse. You're safe. But I need your name to find your mom, okay? What's your name?" She watched me for another long moment. And then she smiled. Not a happy smile. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. The lips rose, symmetrically, but her eyes stayed completely fixed, completely still, completely. Empty isn't the right word. They weren't empty. They were full of something I couldn't identify, something that made me instinctively take a half step backward without realizing I was doing it. "Clara," she said. I blinked. "Clara? That's my name. Clara. My brain tried to organize itself. Clara. Patient Clara. Child. 7 to 9 years old. Hospital gown. She wasn't from my section. I knew every patient in the West Wing, but she was clearly inside the hospital, dressed in hospital clothing. She'd probably left a room on another floor, maybe sleepwalked up the stairs, or wandered in a confused state. Clara, I repeated, in my most reassuring tone. Do you know which room you were sleeping in? She tilted her head to the other side, from right to left, slowly, like a pendulum. This one, she said, and pointed to the room door on her right. Room 312E. I looked at the door, looked back at her. You were sleeping in that room? Yes. Something was wrong with that. I knew something was wrong with it, but my trained mind kept insisting on building a rational narrative. Maybe the room had been used more recently than I'd been told. Maybe the girl had come in through some other route. Maybe. Okay, Clara, I'll come in with you and then I'll call your mom, all right? She said nothing. Instead, she turned toward the door in a movement that seemed slightly too slow, slightly too mechanical, and placed her hand on the handle. The door swung open. The room was empty, not just without a patient. Empty in an absolute sense. No bed, no mattress, no equipment, just the peeling walls, the dust-covered tile floor, and in the center of the ceiling, a hospital light fixture with no bulb. But there was something on the floor, exactly in the center of the room. A doll's bed. Miniature. With a tiny mattress arranged neatly, a small pillow folded, a tiny sheet folded carefully along the edge, as though someone had made that bed with attention, with care, with intention. I stared at that doll's bed for a long moment. Then I looked at Clara. She was watching me with that same fixed gaze, her head slightly tilted, the smile that didn't reach her eyes. Do you live here? I asked, and immediately realized the absurdity of the question. I live here, she confirmed, with total serenity. At that moment, my radio called. 3rd floor nursing, bed 308, heart rate alarm. Anyone copy? I grabbed the radio from my belt. On my way, 30 seconds. I looked at Clara. I need to check on a patient. You'll stay here? Don't leave this room? She said nothing. Clara. Do you understand me? Stay here and I'll come back. You'll come back? She asked, with an intonation that wasn't quite a child asking for reassurance. It was a child who already knew the answer and was checking whether you did too. I will, I said, and I ran. The patient in 308 had pulled off his electrodes in his sleep, a false alarm, common on restless nights. It took me 4 minutes to sort it out. 4 minutes I felt in full, heavy, as though each second had twice its normal weight. When I came back to the east corridor, the access door was closed. I badged in again, stepped inside. The corridor was empty. I went to room 312E. The door was closed. I opened it. Empty, completely empty. The dust on the floor was disturbed. Where Clara and I had stood, I could see my own footprints clearly. The soles of my sneakers, of Clara's footprints, the small, bare ones I'd followed down the corridor. There were only the ones she'd made walking toward the room door. There were no footprints leaving it, and the doll's bed was still there. in the center of the room, with the bed made. But there was something that hadn't been there when I first walked in. On the miniature pillow, there was a strand of hair. Long, dark, completely straight. I stood in that room longer than I should have. My flashlight didn't waver. My radio didn't call. And the hospital around me continued its full silence, its breathing silence, as though nothing had happened. I took photos of the pillow with my phone, of the bed, of the footprints that ended at the door, of the undisturbed dust in the rest of the room. Then I left, closed the door, walked the corridor, pushed through the steel door, and let it lock behind me. I went straight to the nursing station, opened the hospital system, and searched. Patient Clara, age range 6 to 10, recent admissions to the 3rd floor. The system returned one result. I opened the chart. Clara Mendes, 8 years old. Last admission, March 14th, 1998. Room 312E, East Wing, 3rd floor, 26 years ago. Admitted for 16 days. The outcome field was filled with a single word. I can't stop thinking about the smile she gave me before I ran to room 308. I can't stop thinking about how she said, "You'll come back?" Not with anxiety, not with fear, but with that strange calm, that weight of someone who already knows what comes next. And I can't stop thinking about the detail I noticed only as I was leaving room 312E, my flashlight sweeping the floor one last time. The doll's bed had been moved. It was in the same spot, the center of the room, but the sheet, which before had been folded along the edge, was now completely open, spread out, arranged, as if someone had just lain down in it. If you made it this far, you already know this night didn't end in room 3112E. It ended much, much later. And in a way, I'm still not sure I have the right words to describe. Part 2 is where things get truly disturbing, where I found out what was inside the other rooms in the East Wing, where I understood what Clara really wanted and why she had been waiting for a specific kind of nurse to ask. But here's the thing about this story. It only continues for the people who are here when it drops. If you leave now, you might come back and find the comments full of people saying they can't sleep, and you won't know why. Subscribe, hit the bell, because unlike that night, unlike standing alone in that corridor with something that had no business being there, you don't have to face what comes next without warning. I'll keep going. The question is whether you'll still be here when I do. Part 2. What was inside the other rooms? There are things that nursing training teaches you to do on autopilot. Check vitals, administer medication, log incidents, stay calm. Staying calm is what they emphasize most. Actually, not in those exact words, but it's built into every layer of the training. You learn to separate emotion from action because in your work environment, emotion can cost a life. You learn to file away what you feel and process it later. When the emergency is over, when you're home, when you can afford to shake. I thought I had mastered that. I sat at the nursing station for 20 minutes after closing Clara's chart. 20 minutes staring at the screen with that word in the outcome field. Unable to close the file, unable to move, deceased. Clara Mendes, 8 years old, March 14th, 1998. March 30, 1998, 16 days, in room 312E. Cause of death, cardiorespiratory arrest. Underlying diagnosis, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, advanced stage. There was a photo in the digitized record, a grainy ID photo, the kind that was routine in the 90s for patient identification. Poor quality. Coloration faded with time, but it was her, exactly her. The dark straight hair, the small serious face, the head tilted slightly to one side, even in the static posed photo, as though this were simply her natural position in the world. I closed the chart, opened the camera roll on my phone, looked at the photos I'd taken in room 3112E. The doll's bed was there in all of them, sharp, real, photographable. The pillow, the strand of hair, but in the photos taken after I came back. After dealing with the patient in 308, the bed was in the same place, but something was different. Something my mind had processed as the sheet was opened, but which I was now seeing in more detail through the phone screen. On the open sheet, there was a mark, an indentation, the kind of depression that a weight makes in soft material, the approximate size and shape of a small child lying on their side. I put the phone on the desk, stared at the ceiling, breathed, and then I did the most idiotic, or the only possible, thing available to me at that moment. I went back to the East Wing. This time, I entered with a different intention. It was no longer a safety check, no longer professional responsibility. It was something I wouldn't be able to name properly until much later. A compulsion, maybe a feeling that something in that corridor was incomplete, something waiting to be acknowledged, and that I was, for a reason I didn't yet understand, the person designated for that acknowledgement. The steel door opened with the same dry click. The same smell met me. Damp, stale, that faint sweetness. I'd learned to breathe through my mouth, to avoid feeling too strongly. The corridor was empty, but camera 3E, which had lost signal earlier, had come back online. I'd checked before leaving the station. Technically, someone in hospital security should have been watching that feed. Technically, I was being observed, but it was nearly 3 in the morning, and the night security guard, a man of about 60, named Mr. Benton, was well known on the floor for his tendency to sleep between midnight and 4 with the television on at full volume. I moved down the corridor with the flashlight on, this time stopping at each door. Room 301E. Door closed. I pushed it, unlocked. The flashlight swept the space. Empty, dust, peeling walls. But in the corner, there was something that had no business being there. A wheelchair, old, rusted. The rubber of its tires dried and cracked, and in the seat, a pair of children's shoes, white, Velcro strap, the kind that were popular in the 90s. They were clean, no dust on them, as if they'd been placed there recently. I closed the door, moved on. They were all female names, everyone, dozens of them, arranged without apparent order, in different sizes, different depths, some shallow, nearly invisible, others deep enough to expose the brick beneath. I moved the flashlight slowly across the wall, reading Mary, Joan, Teresa, Beatrice, Anna, Rose, Fernanda, Lucia, Daniela, Patricia, Marcela, Helena. In the middle of all these names, one was circled, traced around as if someone wanted to isolate it, highlight it, traced with more pressure than the others. Deeper, more deliberate. Clara. My flashlight stayed on that name for a long time, and then I noticed there was one more name, the last one on the wall, in the bottom right corner, near the floor, where someone who was small, who was low, maybe sitting, maybe lying down, would have reached easily. It was scratched differently from the others, not with the same depth, not with the same force. It was scratched with something soft, something that didn't gouge the plaster, but left a different kind of mark, a damp mark that had dried, but remained distinguishable by its slightly different surface sheen. Carla, my name. I recoiled so hard, I slammed my back into the wall behind me. The flashlight hit the floor and flickered, and for 2 seconds, that felt like 2 minutes. I was in absolute darkness in that room until I managed to crouch down, find the flashlight, hit it until it came back on. When the light returned, I was on my knees on the floor, and my breathing was completely out of control. The wall was exactly as it had been. The names, Clara circled in the center, and Carla in the bottom right corner, in its damp and gleaming mark. I stood, left the room, closed the door. I stayed with my palm flat against the closed door for a moment, trying to find inside myself the trained, professional, calm version of me that knew what to do in a crisis situation. The version that arrived wasn't that one. It was the version that, without fully planning it, turned toward the far end of the corridor and said, out loud to the empty space ahead, "Clara, I know you're here. What do you want?" The silence lasted 3 seconds. "I want you to see," said a voice behind me. I turned. Clara was 2 meters away. She hadn't made a sound, hadn't stepped. I would have heard it in the dust. She was simply there, in her light blue hospital gown, her dark hair, her head slightly tilted. "See what?" I asked, and my voice was steadier than I had any right to be proud of. "What they did." She took a step sideways. Not backward, not forward, sideways, toward the door of room 310E, which was to her left. "Here," she said. She didn't move again, just stood looking at the door. I moved forward. I passed her. And when I did, I felt something I can't describe with scientific precision. A temperature shift, yes, but not the kind from air conditioning or a draft. More localized, a circle of cold, exactly the size of a small body, suspended in the air like an invisible shape. I put my hand on the handle of 310E. "What's in here?" I asked without turning to face her. Silence. I turned. Clara was gone. I opened the door. Room 310E was different from the others. There was a bed, a real hospital bed. Metal. The frame still in place, but no mattress, pushed against the farthest wall from the door, as though someone had dragged it away from the center of the room. But it wasn't the bed that held me. It was what was on the wall beside it. Photographs, dozens of them, taped directly to the wall with adhesive that had yellowed and grown fragile with time. Photos printed on photographic paper, the kind from analog development in the 90s, already faintly faded at the edges, but still perfectly visible in the center. I moved closer with the flashlight. They were photos of the hospital, this floor, photos of the corridors, the rooms, the nursing station, but from a different era, an era when that wing was active, lit, in use, an era when there were patients in the rooms, staff in the corridors, flowers on the bedside tables. In many of the photos, there were children. I moved the flashlight from photo to photo slowly, trying to understand what I was seeing, trying to build a narrative that made sense. In one photo, there was a group of children in a corridor I recognized as this same corridor, in an era when it was painted green and lit with incandescent bulbs. The children were in hospital gowns, some with IV stands, some in wheelchairs, all with the kind of expression that sick children have. Not exactly sadness, but a tiredness that doesn't belong at that age. In the center of the group, there was a girl, dark hair, long, completely straight, her head slightly tilted to one side. She was looking directly at the camera with those eyes I had seen personally hours earlier, and even in the old photo, even on faded paper, there was something in that gaze that made me look away. Clara Mendes, maybe 7 years old in this photo, a year before she died in this same corridor. But it wasn't Clara's presence in the photos that was disturbing me most deeply. It was what appeared in some of them that I kept failing to explain. In 3 of the photos, 3 specific ones, which someone had marked with a red pen mark along the edge, there was an extra figure, a figure that didn't match the rest of the scene, a figure that appeared from behind or in profile or partially obscured by another element in the photo. But that was there, present, impossible to ignore once you'd seen it. A woman in a nurse's uniform, the old-fashioned kind no longer in use, all white, cap, the armband. In none of the 3 photos could I see her face, but in all 3, her posture was identical. Shoulders curved slightly inward, head slightly bowed, hands folded in front of her body, the posture of someone waiting. And then, in the last photo on the wall, the largest one, taped in the center, with no red mark needed because the highlight was already obvious, I saw what Clara wanted me to see. It was a photo of a room. This room, room 310E, taken from an angle suggesting the photographer was standing in the doorway, documenting the interior. In the bed, the same metal bed now pushed against the wall, there was a child lying down, back to the camera, wrapped in a white sheet, dark hair spread across the pillow. Clara, sleeping, or maybe not sleeping, maybe in that in-between state that children with advanced leukemia inhabit in their final weeks. At the side of the bed, sitting in a chair, there was a woman. The woman was facing the camera. She wore the white uniform, the cap, the armband, and her face, finally visible, finally identifiable in this photo, was familiar in a way that made me drop the flashlight for the second time that night. Not because I recognized the woman, because the woman was me. Not someone who looked similar, not someone with comparable features. Me, my face, my eyes, the line of my jaw, the shape of my nose. Exactly me, in a photo taken 26 years before I had ever set foot in this hospital for the first time. I picked up the flashlight off the floor, pulled the photo from the wall. The paper came off easily, the tape too old to hold. I went to the window of room 310E, the one facing the side street, and used the street light to look at the photo with more clarity than my flashlight could provide. It was me, without any doubt, sitting beside Clara Mendez at around 2:30 in the morning on a night in March 1998 in a room I had never entered before tonight. I turned the photo over. On the back, there was handwriting. A child's hand, irregular, large. The letters formed with that open quality children use before they learn cursive. It said, "She promised she would call my mom, but she left and didn't come back. So I kept waiting, so I needed a new one." I folded the photo and put it in my scrubs pocket. I left room 310E. The corridor was empty, but ahead of me on the floor, in the path between room 310E and the steel exit door, there were new footprints. Small, bare feet, coming toward me. I stopped, looked at the footprints, looked at the corridor ahead, empty. But the footprints led directly to where I was standing and stopped, 2 centimeters from my feet. There were no more prints after that point, as though whatever had made those marks in the dust had stopped exactly where I was standing, had stopped inside where I was standing. I stepped sideways, instinctively, looked at where I'd been, on the floor, where my feet had just been. There were 2 marks, not the soles of my sneakers, 2 smaller marks, 2 small bare feet, pressed into the dust by a weight that was no longer there, but that had been inside me. There's something I haven't mentioned yet, and I'll mention it now because it's relevant to what happens in part 3. When I was leaving room 307E, the room of names, I had taken a photo of the wall of the list of names of Carla in the bottom right corner with that damp, gleaming mark. When I looked at that photo in the corridor afterward, after everything, when I was almost at the exit door with Clara's footprints pressed into the dust behind me, my name was no longer there. In the photo, the bottom right corner of the wall was empty, but in the exposed plaster of the real wall, which I had seen with my own eyes, which I had photographed, my name was there. Carla. Except now, in the photo on my phone, it wasn't, as though it had never been scratched there, as though what had made that mark hadn't used a tool, had used a finger, and I knew. In a way, I can't call rational, but can't call irrational either. That, while I was in room 310E, looking at the photographs on the wall, something had gone back to room 307E and erased my name, because my name didn't need to be on that list anymore. I was on a different list now, one I hadn't found yet. Part 3. What the Promise Cost. There are two kinds of fear. The first is the fear that happens in the moment. The cardiac jolt, the adrenaline, the fight or flight response your body executes while your mind is still processing. It's the fear I felt when I saw Clara for the first time in the corridor. The fear I felt when I saw my own face in a 26-year-old photograph. The second kind is quieter, and because of that, infinitely more devastating. It's the fear that comes afterward. The fear you carry home, that sits with you over breakfast, that lies down next to you at night. The fear that doesn't need darkness to exist, that doesn't need empty corridors or impossible photographs. The fear that lives inside your own logic, your own memory, your own identity. The fear that you might not be who you thought you were. That was the fear that followed me through the last stretch of that night. And it's the fear that still follows me every time I walk through a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning and hear or think I hear or can't be certain. I'm hearing the sound of small footsteps on empty linoleum. I left the East Wing for the second time. At 3:42, I let the door lock, went straight to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, stared at my reflection for a long moment, as if checking that it was still me. The same features that had looked back at me in that 1998 photograph looked back from the mirror, and I didn't know whether that should comfort me or terrify me even further. I returned to the nursing station. I placed the photo taken from room 310E on the table in front of me, my face, with a date written on the back in a child's handwriting. March 1998. I opened the hospital system and searched for nursing records from the East Wing, 3rd floor. March 1998. The system was slow. It was an old database, only partially digitized. Records from that era were scanned from physical paper and weren't always complete. But there was a file. Staffing schedule, March 1998, 3rd floor, East Wing. I went directly to the week of March 14 to 30, the period of Clara Mendez's admission. There was a nurse listed as responsible for the East Wing, night shift throughout that entire period. The name appeared in the header of every record sheet, typed in the standardized format typical of scheduling documents from that era. Charge nurse, night shift, C. Saunders, C. Saunders. My last name is Saunders. My full name is Carla Saunders. I closed my eyes, breathed, opened them again. C. Saunders could be any Carla Saunders. Could be a coincidence of last name. Saunders isn't rare. Could be another C. Christine, Camille, Carol. Could be a series of coincidences stacked on top of each other in a single, miserable night shift. It could. I kept reading. In the entry for March 30th, Clara's last day, there was an incident notation, not unusual. Deaths in inpatient care always generated extensive documentation, but there was a paragraph at the end of the notation that wasn't clinical. It was personal. The kind of thing nurses write when they're emotionally exhausted and put into the record what they can't hold inside themselves. Patient CM, age 8, progressed to death at 0317 on 03/30 1998. Family was notified. Patient's mother, Mrs. M.M., arrived at the hospital at 04:20. After the time of death, mother was not present at the time of death as she could not be reached in time. The patient had been requesting her mother's presence throughout the final week of admission. On the night of death, the patient asked the nursing staff to call her mother. The nurse on duty committed to making contact, but was called to an emergency in another bed and did not return to the patient's room before the time of death. Personal acknowledgement of failure to fulfill commitment. Formal apology entered into record. C. Saunders, RN license. X6. X. I stared at the text for a period of time I can't quantify. The nurse had promised to call Clara's mother, had been called away to another emergency, had promised to come back. She hadn't made it back in time. And Clara had died waiting, had died asking for her mother, had died with a broken promise as the last thing she carried with her to wherever 8-year-old girls go when they die in a hospital room at 3 in the morning. I stood from the chair, went to the window of the nursing station, the one looking out at the main corridor, which allowed me to see the East Wing hallway through the glass. The steel door was open. I had verified it was locked before sitting down to search. The steel door was open, and in the east corridor, visible through the station glass, there was a figure, small, motionless, head tilted slightly to one side, looking at me. There is a moment in stories like this when the character makes a decision the audience can't understand rationally, but understands emotionally. The moment when the narrative demands movement, and the character obeys not through logic, but through the accumulated weight of everything that came before. I had reached that moment. I left the nursing station, walked to the steel door, entered the East Wing for the third time that night. Clara was where I had seen her through the window, in the corridor, about 10 meters from the door. She didn't retreat when I entered, didn't advance. She stood watching me with that gaze I had begun to learn to read. Not empty, not threatening, but loaded with something that, if I had to name it, I would call waiting. The specific quality of eyes that have waited longer than any pair of eyes should ever need to wait. You found it, she said. Not a question. I found it, I confirmed. You understood. I think so. She tilted her head to the other side. Slowly, she promised she would call my mom. I know, but she left and didn't come back. I know, Clara. And my mom didn't make it in time. I said nothing, because there was nothing I could say that would fix that. No words that would undo 26 years of an 8-year-old girl waiting in a broken promise in a decommissioned corridor of a hospital that had decided to forget she had ever existed. Are you her? Clara asked. The question caught me off guard, though it shouldn't have. What do you mean? Asked the nurse who promised. Are you her? And I understood, in that moment, what the photograph had meant, what my name on the wall had meant, what all the accumulated coincidences of that night had been building toward. It wasn't that I was literally the same. C. Saunders from 1998. That was impossible. I was 32. I would have been a child myself. In 1998, it wasn't that I was a reincarnation or a continuation or any of the narratives my mind had tried to construct over the past few hours. It was something simpler and more disturbing than any of those explanations. It was that for Clara, there was no difference. Nurse who promised. Nurse who showed up now. Promise that had been hanging in the air for 26 years, waiting for someone who could fulfill it. For Clara, I was the same, because the promise was the same, because what she needed was the same. Her mother, your mother, I said aloud, processing as I spoke. You want me to find your mother? Found what? She tilted her head. The reason. I'll be honest about what happened next, even knowing it sounds like the least believable part of the entire night. After everything, the rooms, the photographs, the footprints, the chart, the staffing schedule, what emotionally undid me wasn't any of those elements. It was the conversation with Clara in the corridor at 4 a.m, with the dust recording my passage and not hers, with the damp, stale smell around us both, like a volume of air that contained us, because she knew things, not generic things, not the kind of vague universal truths that any supernatural presence in a horror film would know, truths that apply to anyone. She knew specific things about me, about what had brought me to this city, this hospital, this shift, things I hadn't told anyone, that I had barely admitted to myself. And as she spoke, with that clear child's voice, no echo, no distortion in that impossible corridor, I understood what she had said about reason, about running, about finding. I won't detail what she said, not because I don't remember. I remember every word, but because it's mine and hers, and the corridors, and the 4 in the mornings, and it belongs to something that doesn't fit in text on a screen. But I will say what I said to her. Clara, I can't undo what happened in 1998. It wasn't me. Not literally. But I understand why, for you, there's no difference. I understand the promise. And I'm not leaving without fulfilling it. She looked at me. You'll find my mom? I'll try. Can you tell me her name? Mom. Her full name. Clara. A pause. Marina. Her name is Marina. Marina Mendez. Clara's mother, who in 1998 had arrived late to the hospital and found the room empty, and her daughter, already gone to wherever children go when they die at 3 in the morning in small city hospitals. I'll look for her, I said. But I need you to tell me one thing. What? If I find her, if I tell her about tonight, about the fact that you're still here, still waiting, what do you want me to tell her? Clara was completely still for a long moment. When she answered, it was with the simplest thing she could have said, the most devastating thing in its simplicity, that it wasn't her fault. At 4:41 in the morning, I left the East Wing for the last time. I let the door lock, kept my hand on it for a moment. I don't know quite why. Goodbye, maybe. Acknowledgement. Returned to the nursing station. Completed the night's records. Did the final patient check. Drank coffee that wasn't warm. but that I needed to drink. At 6:40, as the sun was beginning to come through the windows of the main corridor and the hospital's sounds were scaling up toward their daytime volume, I searched the system for the death record of Clara Mendez. Under family contact, there was a name and phone number. Updated, which meant the family had been in some kind of contact with the hospital at some point, had requested the record be updated for some reason. Marina Mendez, and an address in this same city. She was still here. At 7:15, when my replacement arrived and I handed off the shift in my most normal-sounding voice, I tucked the piece of paper with Marina Mendez's address in my scrubs pocket next to the photograph and walked out of the hospital. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long minute before starting the engine. I pulled the photograph from my pocket, the 1998 photo, with my face sitting beside Clara's bed. I looked at it and I realized, now in the daylight, now with different eyes and different clarity, something I had seen in the photo, but that my brain had processed incorrectly in the adrenaline of the early morning. The woman in the photo, me, was facing the camera, looking directly at the lens. But Clara, lying in the bed, had been facing away from the camera, except for her head. Clara's head was turned backward, toward the camera, toward me, toward the version of me that was in the photo, and perhaps toward the version of me now looking at the photo, with that smile. The smile that didn't reach her eyes, but the eyes. Clara's eyes in this photo, which I hadn't been able to see clearly in the darkness of room 310E. Clara's eyes in daylight were not the same eyes I had seen in the corridor, not those fixed, loaded eyes, full of waiting and something unnameable. Clara's eyes in the photo were a child's eyes, just a child's eyes. 8 years old, exhaustion, illness, but also curiosity, also life. Also something I recognized in a way that took the air from me for one complete second, as the specific quality of eyes that still believe everything is going to be okay, that the nurse will come back, that mom will arrive, that the promise will be kept. I folded the photo, put it back in my pocket, started the engine, and thought about Marina Mendez, somewhere in this city, waking up to another ordinary day, without knowing that the night before, in a corridor that most people had decided to forget, her daughter had found someone willing to listen. I still haven't gone to speak with Marina Mendez. I need you to understand why before you judge me. It's not cowardice, or not only cowardice. It's that since that night, some things have changed in ways I'm still processing. Things that make me hesitate before picking up the phone. Things that make me wonder whether what I think happened is exactly what happened, or whether there's a layer I still haven't seen. A last door in the East Wing I still haven't opened. For instance, in the week after Clara's night, Mrs. Hargrove, the charge nurse, the white-haired woman with eyes that calculate everything, called me into her office and asked, without preamble and without explanation, "You went into the East Wing?" I said yes, that I had heard a noise and went to check. She looked at me for a long moment with those calculating eyes, then said, "What did you see in there?" I said, "Empty rooms, dust." She nodded, slowly. "Good," she said, then added, almost to herself, looking at the window behind me, "Sometimes good is all there is." I left her office not fully understanding what had happened in that exchange. But that same afternoon, reviewing the records I had accessed in the early hours, I noticed the system had logged my search and that someone had accessed the same record shortly after me at 6:11 in the morning, 16 minutes before my replacement arrived. The login that had accessed Clara Mendez's chart at 6:11 was Mrs. Hargrove's. She knew I had consulted the chart, knew I had been in the East Wing, and her only question had been, "What did you see in there?" Not "Why did you go in?" Not "What were you doing?" But "What did you see?" As if the answer mattered, as if the answer determined something about what would come next. And then, 2 days later, I returned to the nursing station after rounds and found something on the desk. It hadn't been there when I left. 5 minutes earlier, I was certain. An envelope. No name, no sender. Sealed. Inside, there was one sheet of paper. A single sentence, handwritten. In handwriting I didn't recognize. "You are the third." The third. I spent days trying to decode what that meant, going back over everything. The names on the wall. In room 307E. The list of female names, all marked, with Clara circled in the center, and my name in the bottom right corner. A name that had disappeared from the photo, but that had been on the wall. The third. What? The third nurse? The third person to enter the East Wing? The third to see Clara? Or the third to receive a task, a mission, an unfulfilled promise that needed someone willing to carry it? I don't know. What I know is that I searched the hospital's personnel records for the past 10 years. The maximum the system would allow without special authorization, and found 2 nurses who had resigned abruptly, both after night shifts on the 3rd floor, both without adequate departure notices, one in 2017, one in 2021, both with the last name Saunders, both with first names beginning in C. That led me to a search I wasn't sure I wanted to perform. A search that brought me to an obscure forum in a forgotten corner of the internet, where former hospital employees traded stories they would never tell officially. And there, I found a post from 2021. No name. Anonymous user describing a night on the night shift of an unnamed hospital, a decommissioned corridor, a girl, a question about a mother, and at the end of the post, a line that the other C. Saunders had written before deleting the profile and disappearing from the forum. She showed me the photo. I was in the photo. I don't understand how that's possible, but I was in the photo. And she said, "I'm the second, that there was one before me, and that there will be another after. Third, I went to speak with Marina Mendez last Thursday. She lives in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator, 12 minutes from the hospital by car. She's 72 years old, white hair cut short. And when she opened the door for me, I had called ahead, introduced myself as a nurse from the hospital with Information about her daughter's admission. She looked at me for a moment with an expression that wasn't surprise. It was recognition. "I've waited for you before," she said. "Twice. But you're the first one who actually came." I went inside, sat down, told her everything. She listened in silence, hands folded in her lap, without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said it wasn't my fault? Yes. And that she keeps waiting? She was waiting, I said, because there was something in the way I had left that corridor on the last night. Something in the way the door had locked behind me in a way that felt different from the other times. With a finality the others hadn't had, that made me believe the waiting might have come to an end. "I think maybe not anymore." Marina Mendez nodded. Her eyes filled, but didn't overflow. "Thank you," she said. And this is the last thing I will say, the last image I'll leave you with." She stood, walked to the shelf on the living room wall, and picked up a picture frame, handed it to me. It was a photo, old faded coloration. Clara, with her dark straight hair, sitting up in a hospital bed, smiling. A real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. And beside the bed, sitting in a chair, in the white uniform of the era, it wasn't me. It was an older woman. Different. Someone I had never seen before. The nurse C. Saunders from 1998 wasn't me. The photograph I had found in room 310E, the one that had shown me my own face, was no longer in my pocket. It had disappeared at some point between leaving the hospital and arriving at Marina's apartment. "That's the photo I have of her in the hospital," Marina said, looking at the image of her daughter. The nurse was very kind. Clara liked her. I looked at the photo, at Clara's smile, at the eyes that were just a child's eyes. "What happened to the nurse?" I asked. Marina took a moment. "She resigned not long after, 2 weeks after Clara died. I never knew why. Maybe she couldn't stay. I gave the photo back, left the apartment. On the street, back in my car, I sat for a long time. I thought about the impossible photograph I had held in my hands, and that had vanished. I thought about my name on the wall that had disappeared from the photo. I thought about the 2 previous C. Saunderses who had entered the East Wing and left without completing what Clara needed. I thought about the envelope with the words, "You are the third." I thought about Clara saying, "You understood." About you, about why you came here. And I thought about the simplest and most complicated thing of all. The photograph had shown my face because Clara had needed to show my face. Not because I was literally that nurse from 1998, but because I was the person who had come into the East Wing that night. And Clara had needed me to understand that the promise was real, that there were consequences, that there was weight. She had shown me what I could become if I didn't follow through. The nurse who walks away, who doesn't come back, who leaves a little girl waiting. And I hadn't walked away. I still work at St. Luke's Regional. Night shift, 3rd floor. The East Wing is still decommissioned. The steel door is still there. My badge still opens it. I haven't gone back in. But sometimes, late at night, when the full silence of the hospital settles around my nursing station. The hum of equipment, the beep of monitors, the creak of the floor. I hear something from the direction of that door. Not footsteps, not a voice, just a different kind of silence. A silence that doesn't breathe. A silence that is at peace. And I think that maybe that's the only resolution that stories like this have. Not revelation, not complete explanation, not every question answered or every mystery undone. Just the silence of a wait that came to an end. At least for now. There is one last thing. Mrs. Hargrove stopped me in the corridor last week, looked at me with those eyes that calculate everything, asked, as though it were casual small talk, as though she were asking about the weather. "Did you go speak with her?" I said I did. She nodded, slowly, the same way she had nodded when I said I'd seen only empty rooms. "Good," she said again, and then, turning to leave, she added something she hadn't said the first time. "Let's hope you're the last." I watched her back as she walked away down the corridor. The white hair, the small, precise steps, the posture of someone carrying things she doesn't share. And I thought, the last what? The last one to enter the East Wing? The last to see Clara? The last to need to go speak with Marina? Or the last see Saunders? She turned at the end of the corridor and disappeared from view before I could ask. And the question stayed with me. It stays with me still, because if there is one thing I learned that night about Clara, about promises, about the weight of things left unfinished in the world, it's that some questions don't ask to be answered. They ask to be carried, like a doll's bed in the center of an empty room, like a strand of hair on a pillow that doesn't exist, like a child's name on a wall that no one sees, waiting, always waiting, for someone to arrive and not walk away